What I want to go through tonight is how to feel unstoppable over the Christmas break in a body you feel good in. How do we make sure you're strong? How do we make sure you're stable? How do we make sure that those niggles in your back or knee or whatever it might be right now are not getting in the way? I want to give you a really quick game plan, breaking it down step by step to make sure that you can get an awareness of where to start, what to focus on first. All right. If that sounds like a good game plan, comment live below. I'd love to know who's watching us either on the live or if you're watching replay, watch replay. Adding these comments really helps more people see the video and overall make sure that we can help more people make sure they have a good summer. So if that sounds like a good idea to you, it might be worth helping me out get this video out to more people. This is obviously the last day that I'll be in Wellington. I'm going to be moving up to Hawke's Bay for a bit of a break up there. Hope everyone's family and holiday plans are probably in full swing by now. But we had an amazing day talking to team, talking to everyone today to make sure that we come into January with an even better focus and really service. So what I'm going to do is we're going to break this down for you, team, into 3 quadrants. And like I said, I want to give you a quick guide. So we're going to get an idea of where we start. Okay. So the big one that we want to take into account, like I mentioned before, is taking a look at this word stability, right? This is something that if you saw the testimonial in the group earlier this week, a client share in our app, he said, look, you've completely changed how my back feels by going through a couple tweaks over a video, right? My physio couldn't help me, my chiropractor couldn't help me, and it was a simple shift and focus on what really gets somebody's body moving forward. I'll see if I can find this for you. Here it was. So inside the group, we had, this is from our boy. So we had, Ollie, thanks so much for the call yesterday. I did the muscle activation technique exercise yesterday, spent the night on the floor. Something went crack pop at the night, and I now have very little pain, right? This guy was talking to me yesterday with like 9 out of 10 pain. He was popping Panadols and trying to just cope with the pain. We'll continue with those activations, but really appreciate the expertise you have been able to do, something that the physio and chiropractor have not been able to, right? So by all means, there's a space for the specialists. They are still very valuable in the right setting. But the big thing that came through that I think is really an issue with today's sort of manual therapy stuff, whether it be massage, acupuncture, or chiropractor, is by no means, they definitely have their place, but it's making sure that it's a release component, which means it feels good in the moment or it feels good just after the moment. Massage sometimes doesn't feel good in the moment, but we're focusing on relaxing muscle, right? Which means we're completely missing the main point, which is there's a problem with stability. And we're talking just about muscular pain right now. If we've got cartilage damage or tendons, ligaments, then there's something that's different. We're talking about muscular pain in back, in whatever's coming through. Back's quite a common one. So taking the time to understand why is that strained, it's strained because it's overworking, right? If I go put 200 kilos in your arms right now, you're going to be strained because you're not able to hold that load. And it's kind of like that one muscle in your lower back that seems to be doing all the work, which is very common. A lot of people are not balanced through a lot of those muscles, or there's a lack of stability through your glutes or even your lats or hamstrings or a lot of these muscles in our back. And trying to improve the contraction and firing of the muscles around that will make a dramatic difference in how you function and feel, right? If one muscle is doing the work, the other ones are relaxing and not doing anything, that is where those strains coming through. When we can find and identify the muscles that might not be helping out, that's where we can really start to make some really big changes, right? So an example here that we see a lot with hips and that I went through with this guy was, I said boy before, I don't know why, is taking the time to look at, okay, the back is the one doing all the work right now, and that's what's strained. So we went through an assessment of his hips, of his glutes, and all these muscle groups to find out what was not stable, right? We found a couple muscles that were shaking all over the show, and they weren't contracting like the others. And walking through that process to identify what those were for him as an individual, we were able to turn back on those muscles that were dormant, that weren't working like they should be, right? So that was a really, really good awareness in building up the stability base, right? Taking the time to find out what was not working so that we can get more stable. If we get more muscles working as they should, we start to create more stability, right? So that's the first point we want to look at when trying to make sure that we improve how our body functions and trying to make sure that we don't have injury. Now, the second one we want to take into account as we went through these activations is we're going to take into account something called progression, right? And this is not going to be progression in weight necessarily. It's going to be progression in exercise overall, right? A simple progression could be for a push-up, right? If you can't do a push-up right now, then doing it against a wall at that sort of height there, and then going down to more of an angle and doing it there, then going down to the ground and doing it fully horizontal. And if that's still easy, we can now start elevating the feet and going back up this way, right? So there will be a change in angles too, but it makes it a harder exercise. So without changing the weight, we can improve or increase or work our way through the progression of that exercise to something harder. Right, so taking the time to realize that not just weight, but range or tempo, all of these things can be really helpful, right? If we do it slower, it's making it harder. If we go from holding something to balance while we do a straight leg deadlift, or like a one leg movement, to then removing the hand and creating a balance component, it makes the exercise harder. So there's lots of exercises we use there to walk you through a simple progression to build you up. If you can't do a push-up, you can't do a pull-up, walking you through those steps to get you closer to it is much better than trying to go for one and injuring yourself, right? So building yourself up in a progressive format can be really, really helpful. Now, the third one we're going to take into account, and this is one that many people tend to miss, that we look into deep with our nutrition, with our gut health focus, is understanding inflammation, right? We're taking into account if you're feeling pain in joints, you're feeling like things are creaking and popping and just aching overall, likely there is some inflammation in that region. Now, if we've just bumped our elbow and things are uncomfortable this week, having an acute inflammation in the area is a good thing, right? It helps repair that area. The trouble is, through the stress and the foods we're eating and these long-term issues, is we're starting to see that inflammation is no longer acute, it is chronic, right? It's constantly there. Now, the really big issue is now we're starting to take anti-inflammatory drugs, right? The ironic part here is if we start taking anti-inflammatories, yes, it's going to improve the issue initially, but if we keep taking that long-term for chronic inflammation, then we're actually causing more issues downstream, right? Past the gut in the small intestine, which actually causes more inflammation, right? So we've got this vicious cycle of trying to reduce inflammation, and then we're increasing inflammation because we're taking things long-term. Along with stress, along with the lack of sleep, along with the wrong food choices, inflammation is one of the biggest keys to feeling those pains in joints. And if you want to improve how your elbows, knees, shoulders, or back feel, inflammation can be a huge part of it. So as we've talked about with a lot of our trainings, taking into account foods that you're sensitive to, that you feel bloated, tired, gassy on, are going to be, if you remove them, you will make a big difference to how those joints feel. But taking that time to look at that as being a recovery or a joint benefit as well might just give you that extra nudge that's required to look after your body, right? If you remove the foods that are causing more inflammation, you'll see a drastic improvement in your recovery and overall feel of those muscles, all right? So really, really important. So if we go back to this, understanding how we take and put this whole thing together, right? We've got our three together. We need to take into account the stability component. We need to look at a progression long-term so we can build that strength back up. And then three, we want to make sure we're taking into account inflammation. We're taking into account what is actually causing this pain to feel worse and really exacerbating the problem further, right? So ultimately, from today's discussion, the big thing we're taking into account is between stability and progression. Ultimately, we're looking at range. What range can you handle? What tempo can you handle? And potentially weight or some other level of making that harder over time, right? The big thing we look at there is trying to make sure this is over time. It's small progressions in the right way so that we don't cause those issues in the short term. The second one we're looking at, as we take into account progression and the inflammation, is ultimately we're looking at recovery, right? If we're eating the wrong foods and we're exercising all the time, or we're exercising more than usual, we need to make sure that recovery is part of our focus. If we're not recovering and we're just working out harder and harder, or we're trying to keep up with the kids on the bike, or we're doing more weekend adventures than we used to, fantastic. But make sure you're taking into account the foods you're eating, because if you're adding in the surfs or the bike rides or whatever those holiday activities are right now, but you're having the beers, you're having the sausage rolls, you're having all the crappy food, that together becomes a really, really bad mixture to reduce your recovery and also increase inflammation in the body. So if you want to be that action hero over summer, trying to make sure you can do all those weekend and summer activities, holiday activities, you want to make sure that you're taking into account this inflammation and recovery base, right? And then the last one we're taking into account with inflammation and stability together is a really interesting one, is just being aware of your impact, right? And by impact, I'm not meaning how many people you impact, it's how much how much the joints are feeling, right? So if you can lean towards activities like swimming or bike riding rather than basketball and running, you're going to get a lot more longevity out of your joints, right? Both long term and in the holidays. So taking into account that, if there's a lot of impact, it's going to increase that inflammation. If you keep doing the exercises repetitively, then you're really starting to create some instability or some repetitive natures that are going to cause further wear and tear on the joints. All right. So impact is something we really want to take into account as being just really being aware of protecting those joints, right? If you go from sitting in an office chair all day and sort of doing normal activities to running, jumping, playing basketball, or doing vertical jumps, or whatever it might be that we do in our summer holidays, we just want to be aware of how much impact that's putting on the joints, right? Don't just decide to go for a 5K run because your joints will complain about it, right? Obviously, fitness is going to be a component of that as well, but just taking into account how much impact will play a role, because you'll feel it the next day. If the general rule of thumb is if you're feeling the aches after the workout, then it's clearly going to be a little bit too much. If you're feeling it the following day, it was far too much. So just build it up, lean towards activities like your swimming or your biking or something that you're still getting a really good workout in. You're still doing those activities with friends and family, but it's not damaging the joints in the process. Huge difference. Let's take care of those patellar tendons and Achilles. It goes a really, really long way. So really, ultimately, the biggest goal that we're looking at here is if we as we talked about before, this is really my short-term or overview at really making sure that we are injury-free, right? We're taking the time to do this a little bit smarter this year, making sure that we're looking at the full picture, taking into account the full trifecta. This is really just sharing how I approach this with our client on Tuesday, sharing that client review through, understanding how we take into account making sure that your body feels unstoppable over the summer break, is making sure we're looking at how the body works as a whole, how we're managing these three core elements being inflammation, progression of exercise or resistance, and stability of muscular balance overall. If you take that into account, we can start to really build up that strength, or simply choose smarter exercises through the break. That goes a really, really long way. All right. If you want to learn a little bit more about this and really get access to my thought process around muscle contraction and actually building out a game plan, simply comment exercise game plan below and we'll give you access to that. We've been giving access to that all week. So it'd be really, really good to give you the full training on that, break this down a little bit further, and understanding maybe some exercises that you can add in as activations or whatever to make sure that we can build that back up. Happy to give that away. Hope you have an incredible break, team. And hopefully that gave you some insight or some value into our trifecta around building all of this together. Makes a really, really big difference when you start to work with your body rather than against it. Okay. Have an awesome rest of your week, team. I'm going to go play tennis now and look after those knees. Have a great one. See ya. Bye.